Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Watchmen. So, the one thing that I could say about this movie is this movie has to be a really amazing visual team film. And a lot of people would immediately just be like, what about like Avengers and all the Avengers movies? Those gotta be like a really good team film. Story wise, yes, but visual, like they're all they're all just like all that matters is the story part of it, the goal part of it. Like it doesn't have to be visually impressive at any point because it's like, dude, you're just gonna come in here regardless. This movie is to be visually interesting. There's a lot of visual things about this film. Plus, it also has a time period attachment to it, which is to make it a heavily complicated film because you have to get not only a time period right, but then on top of that, you have to also tell this number of people's life story, which I think that's the only real exhausting thing about this film is you have to tell the life story of seemingly not only one team, but two. Because not only do you get the Minutemen in the beginning here, that most of that Minutemen team slowly but surely die off at some point. Then you get the Watchmen in here that are to supposedly give up all of their masks, but decide to go against that and are to desperately want to put them back on to do their own thing. So I am, through this review, not going to timeline year by year by year that everyone is to be a thing in this thing, because I know there's having to record and say like, oh, in 1940, like, because we have in this movie it branches from 1939 to 1960 to 1980, and I'm just like, bah, with all this. There's too much stuff to cover in this gosh darn film. As far as yearly stuff, we have the JFK assassination that has to be covered in this movie. We have to cover Richard Nixon being in this film, and then handing it off to Ronald Reagan at some point in this movie. There's the Minuteman switching into Watchmen in this movie. I've probably said that. We have the whole origin story of Dr. Manhattan, Silk Specter, Silk Specter, and a comedian in this movie that we have to cover. And then we have to kind of cover Rorschach and his investigations throughout this entire film that lead him consistently to one pattern of things. And then we also get a billion other characters that we have. Adrian Osmandius. Yeah, we have to cover Osmandius. And his story also. So with that said, I really like the dark and grittiness of this film. It kind of really breaks it up from all the the ho 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 like the Mickey Mouse's Avengers movies that have to be kind of so squeaky clean, and like you get freaking naked people in a film in a superhero movie. I think that if you probably don't have a Watchmen film, you probably don't have Amazon shows like The Boys. You probably don't have like stuff like Kick-Ass or like just dark and grittier stories like possibly Superheroes Must Die or you don't have that darker kind of way of approaching things. Like, I'm not going to say, like, oh, The Dark Knight, yeah, that's a dark and grittier story. Like, that's kind of like a no-brainer. They were bound to do that anyways. Like, that was a given thing. Um, but I can say that, like, oh, The Dark Knight, but, like, I'm sure The Watchmen or The Dark Knight, I don't know when came when, so it doesn't matter. But, like, I think if you probably don't have this kind of movie in the world, that doesn't want, or that eventually pushes more people to put out something that is to be much of a more adult like content, instead of having it be so close to a Mickey Mouse widest audience that you can appeal to kind of film. And I like that change. I like that tweak of things where it seems that a superhero genre can cater to adults and can just focus upon that. And but it's okay to be also a Mickey Mouse widest range reaching thing. But I would much rather also like this kind of story somewhere in there. Mix it up. Try to give uh, the hardest R rating movie you can do, like a Deadpool or or eventually one of the Logan films, one of the Wolverine films. So with that said, with that in mind, I'm gonna otherwise go into this double 5 time territory. Let's just go into spoilers. Hopefully, I can get all this stuff out because without a doubt, there's a lot of stuff to mention here. I'm probably gonna try and quickly graze through a lot of stuff because this is 2.5 hours of change of film, and I am going to, as quickly as possible, go through it. So if any detail is not to be told, there is a ton of videos about Watchmen, the movie, the show, everything. They can probably possibly break down this movie second to second, minute to minute, whatever, breaking down every single year, every single little tiny character. There's probably there's YouTube videos going to Comics Explain, and he'll explain to you possibly the whole Watchmen ordeal of things. And then some. So, with that said, let's just go into this film. Let's just break it down into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of the film, we of course have it be that we have a couple things that I wanna kind of cover, but I know it's not the exact second of opening of film. We have a team that, of course, had came before the Watchmen, which was called the Minutemen. Minutemen that didn't just have just men in it, which is kind of weird. Because we, of course, have like the Silk Specter. We have the first one, not the second one. We have the first Night Owl. We have Comedian. We have Hooded Justice. We have Silhouette. We have Dollar Bill, I think. We have all these kind of other goofy Ash-like characters, and we find out that slowly but surely a number of these characters, one day or the other, all died. Like, we kind of, like, the more interesting one is to be kind of like Silhouette, who we find was actually to be gay, and she was to be dead right next to her lover in her bed. But all the other characters, with the exclusion of the very first Silk Spectre, Comedian, and the first Night Owl, were all to be killed off, one way or the other. So in the flashbacks that kind of cover this movie, we at one point have a comedian who is to uh, be in the mix of a picture of this Minuteman group, all of a sudden seeing Silk Spectre and deciding to try and be romantic with Silk Spectre. Sadly enough, whether she wants it to be a romantic thing or not. Uh, and so the comedian tries to force himself on Silk Spectre, and they fight one another. And then Hooded Justice is to hear what's going on, rushes in to try and beat up comedian, and like we can really just start to easily and quickly see that a lot of these characters are just insane, much more than trying to defend their city of whatever. Like, we just find a lot of these characters just losing their freaking mind. Like, we have also another Minuteman character called Mothman, who goes off to be in an insane asylum because he just loses his mind. We see him being carted off uh, into this uh, into this ambulance of sorts, being put to a mental hospital. And a lot of these characters, whether they had the best intentions or whatever, eventually just lose their freaking minds. So that's kind of the interesting thing of this film, is to kind of slowly see where a lot of these heroes head. So in the beginning of this film, we see the comedian who, of course, is to be sitting, watching some TV, watching some Richard Nixon, or watching some kind of talk about something, how it seems that their doomsday clock is ticking away, and possibly certain countries are coming up in arms. They're consistently talking about Russia because we're starting to get into the Cold War of things, because we've already gone into Vietnam, the Vietnam War, where it seems that Dr. Manhattan had gone and wiped that all out, and supposedly the Vietnamese had wanted to personally surrender to Dr. Manhattan himself, and so both Dr. Manhattan and the comedian had been sharing some beers at a bar. All of a sudden, the comedian is to be uh, presented with a woman who is to say that she is to have his child, and the comedian is to want to do nothing of it because, of course, he wouldn't. And so all of a sudden, this woman is to go and break this bottle and is to slice the comedian's face, to have the comedian in response shoot this woman. And so that's when the comedian is turned to Dr. Manhattan, like, do you even care? Like, do you even have feelings? Do you even do you even know what you're doing anymore? Like, because that bottle could have been turned into like a snowflake. My gun could have been turned into Swiss cheese, and you didn't bother to do anything. You didn't bother to do it. You didn't prevent any of this. And the comedian is just like, well, why didn't you? And Dr. Manhattan's like, I don't know. I'm not sure. So the comedian is sitting down watching TV, thinking about all the stuff that he's ever done at some point. Um, and so we have a much older comedian who is uh, to all of a sudden have a person at his door that, of course, is to be some masked man. And the comedian has already known that this guy eventually was going to come for him. Because we have a flashback where the comedian is talking to a guy named Malik, saying that there is a number of people on a certain list, and Malik is actually one of them. And so the comedian is to tell Malik, while he's blubbering and crying and whatever at Malik's bedside, that Malik is probably the comedian's best friend. What kind of weird, messed up world is that? That comedian's arch nemesis is probably his best friend. Weirdly. So let's get to it. So this masked man is to go and try and fight comedian, tossing him around his apartment, but also we have the comedian going and taking these knives and tossing them like he has a meat cleaver that he goes and tosses against this guy, and he either is to catch him and toss them back, or he is to pretty much avoid all of these knives. So we of course get this massive battle between these two people, and so there has to be that this guy has to have some superpower, of course, to then fight the comedian and toss him out this window. So he can't just be this average guy. There has to be more to something of this. So the comedian is tossed out this window, and of course he is to be killed. So that takes us to now have, of course, them doing this whole investigation, and we have all these cops that are to arrive upon this place to say, like, yeah, this guy put one heck of a fight together against this guy. Excuse me. And so the one thing that is to come with this is to have eventually Rorschach be going through and also checking through the comedian's home, kind of seeing the struggle, the battle, and whatever, but to also find the little pin that comedian was to have that now has blood on it of his own comedian body. So the beginning of this is to kind of showcase bits and pieces of also like Rorschach's life at some point, where he is to just kind of mention that he is to whisper no when anyone is to really want a helping hand coming from him. All the politicians or all the people that are to just be this fat cat money grubbing people, where he's just like, no, I'm not going to help those people. Rorschach is to always help just the little guy. Even when his mother in some flashback is to tell him that she would have wanted an abortion instead of having him, which is a horrific like scene. So after Rorschach is to comb through the comedian's place and is to just start to think that since the comedian had died and there had been so many other Minutemen who had one way or the other died for some other reason, weirdly Rorschach is to now think that all masked men are to be slowly but surely killed off. And it doesn't quite make sense because a lot of the masked men had all decided to retire, had all decided to give it up, because there had been some act that had been put in place that when people were to protest for this, when people were to try and get a vote done for this to put a whole thing together to try and stop these guys, stop these vigilantes from from seeking their own brand of justice, even though there were some of these characters that were to be tying themselves to the government one way or another. Like the comedian had been a person who had fought for the government at some point, and Dr. Manhattan had been uh, scientifically tied to the government one way or another, even to the point where the United States country had really just depended on a Dr. Manhattan to save them from a number of things like the Vietnam War, or just kind of save them from a possible nuclear event. So Rorschach is to go, and immediately the first person that he is to go and try and warn is to be Night Owl. So Rorschach is to go off to Night Owl's place, and Night Owl is, of course, going and having a few beers with the old Night Owl, kind of swapping stories and just kind of getting these fun little anecdotes and stuff like that about their time, and how Night Owl was to say that the original Night Owl, who was Mason, is to tell the second Night Owl, which is actually Daniel, I think. Good God. Dan, there we go. Dryberg. It's kind of funny because Rorschach is to consistently say the word Dryberg in his when he is to talk, and I thought that was some weird goofy thing that he was to just call Night Owl. I thought he called him like Drybird or something like that, or some weird goofy thing, but I guess his name is Dryberg. So when going into this film, we have both Mason and Dan swapping stories, and then Mason is asked Dan, like, "Hey, do you miss it?" And Dan's like, "Oh no, like no, there's no way." It's like, "Hey, do you miss it?" And he's like, "Nah, me neither." Like both of them lying to their teeth because they both do miss it. Hence why they continue to swap these stories. To just kind of like remember the good old days when they used to be they used to be like helpful. They used to be heroes. They used to, hence why they would always share these stories with one another. So when Dan or Night Owl is to return, I think I'm just gonna call him like, I think I'm gonna call everybody by their superhero names, even though I know like, so Specter 2 is Lori. I know comedian's name is Blake. Rorschach is just to really be Rorschach, because any other name he doesn't want to go by. So Night Owl comes back home to a door that had been kicked in. And so Night Owl is to spot that Rorschach is eating his beans straight out of a can. And so now Rorschach is trying to warn Dryberg that somebody's coming for masks, which there's no real guarantee. There's no serial killing thing that says that or points that out, because there's only to be the comedian dead. So that leads to Dryberg just going like, okay, because like we have the whole exchange of Rorschach giving Dan the little pendant thing, or the little pin thing, where it's like, oh, like what is this, bean juice? And it's like, no, human bean juice. It's blood. So eventually they have this exchange letting us know that both Night Owl and Rorschach had been uh, a previous team together. And there's also like the whole animated Watchmen thing. There's a whole animated Watchmen thing that I know exists where there's a lot of extended things that that thing does that this one doesn't, where it kind of goes into scenes a lot more in depth and stretches them out a little bit more. So that could be fascinating to anybody who is to be wanting to see like an extended variation of Watchmen. So, because I started to watch that and I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting that it's a long, stretched out variation of the same film. But, anyways, so after Rorschach is to talk to Night Owl and just kind of tell him what's going on, he goes and heads on to, of course, to talk to Dr. Manhattan to see if Dr. Manhattan has any future knowledge about what's going on or can easily see who the killer of this guy is because maybe they found him in some newspaper article somewhere, or maybe there's some kind of uh, person who ID'd this killer because maybe he's going to kill again in the future. And it seems that Dr. Manhattan, who is to be working on this machine for Osmandius, is to not be able to see his future. His future is bizarrely blocked for some reason or another. And so the reason why Dr. Manhattan is to say it's blocked is maybe there's a possibility that even Dr. Manhattan at some point had been um, annihilated. That possibly there had been a nuclear war that had broken out, wiping out the ability of Dr. Manhattan being able to see uh, past a certain point. So Rorschach is talking uh, to of course the Silk Specter, and so Silk Specter 2 is to of course tell Rorschach to call her by her actual name, and so he calls her Lori or Miss Jupiter because that's her actual name. So you would have thought, like, wouldn't they have gone with just Jupiter anyways? Like, instead of calling her Silk Spectre, but whatever, I guess. Like, because Silk Spectre is just such a random Esh like name. So, after Rorschach is to go and talk to Dr. Manhattan and get no answers, and because Doctor Manhattan is to basically tell Rorschach that he's coming there to get absolutely no answers, and so it's a pointless endeavor for Rorschach to have come here. And so Doctor Manhattan just decides to teleport Rorschach to another location because he's done talking with him anyways, and the conversation they're going to have with one another is just going to be pointless. And so then Laurie is to, of course, ask Dr. Manhattan if they want to go out, and Dr. Manhattan's like, no, I know that you were already going to ask me that, and so you're going to end up with Night Owl. Because there's no one else that is to be really your friend, so you're going to seek the comfort of Dryberg, and because I won't be able to go out with you, because I won't, because Dr. Manhattan seems to always be busy putting together whatever thing that Ozymandias is to need right now. So, which we find out that the machine that Dr. Manhattan continues to put together is to basically just being a replica of Dr. Manhattan's power, which is kind of an interesting thing. So, Laura ends up going off to see, of course, Dan, and so we have both of these characters reminisce about old times and how Dan was to meet a guy who was to be named like the Punisher or something like that, where he would go around spouting, punish me." And so Laurie was asked Dan, what did they do with that character? And so Dan is to say, it's like, well, like, Dan didn't do anything, but it seemed that when this guy tried to pull that on Rorschach, he dropped him down an elevator, but an elevator shaft and killed him. So really, Laurie used to just be like, man, like, it's sad that we don't have any real, like, true fun between any of us anymore. And Dan is like, well, that's because the comedian's dead. Like, how are we going to have any more fun? Um, so both of them have really caught up or catch up together. And it seems like they're just kind of, they're so happy that they kind of like got to talk to one another. And so Silk Spectre just goes off to make it back to Dr. Manhattan. So Night Owl is to decide to go off to head to Ozymandias's place, where we find out that Ozymandias is to be this kind of billionaire who is to be this genius level intellect that I guess has gone and made tons and tons of money off the Watchmen by creating several action figures of them, creating a whole smorgasbord of uh, things like supposedly a Watchmen movie and TV show and whatever, all of these things, and basically recording all of these moments that this team was to have together. And so these people are just like, hey man, like, isn't it kind of horrible that you're trying to reap the benefits of you being on this team? And Ozymandias is like, well, wouldn't anybody take this and just try to like do this, like, if they had the means, if they had the money, if they had the ability? And so this team all starts to just kind of, or this news reporter people just all start to just fiddle off. And so both Ozymandias and Dan are talking. And so Dan is to mention Ozymandias. That's like, well, hey, like, Rorschach has told me that possibly capes, like, people are coming after masks. People are coming after capes. So, like, you might be next, considering you're the most public one out of all of us. Like, someone's probably going to be coming for you at some point. And Ozymandias is like, okay, well, that's great and everything, but like, we don't even know if this is going to like legitimately happen, which actually does. Uh, So now we push on to, of course, having the funeral of the comedian. Dr. Manhattan's there. Dan's there. Dan tosses the pin of the comedian into the grave. Uh, so now we have to uh, mention the backstory of. The Keene Act from 1977 was to go and have the Watchmen uh, take down all their masks. And there was a whole riot in the streets about it, where the Watchmen had to go and stop all these people from rioting in the streets because they were protesting, but they were also rioting. And so the Watchmen had to go in every night and try to stop the rioting and stop the protesting. And so uh, to the point of, we have one spot where Archimedes comes in with both the comedian and the team. They drop in, and comedian starts throwing like smoke pellets and stuff like that. And so Night Owl's like, how are we going to be able to just continue to keep this up? And comedian is just like, hey man, like we're just gonna have to just keep on keeping on. So the comedian is like pelting people in the chest, in the face, in the whatever. And so the Night Owl is just like, man, what happened to us? Like, what happened to the American dream? And the comedian's like, well, the American dream came true. That's the whole problem. Like, now, um, like things have gotten worse because supposedly, like, everything that we could have hoped for, um, or everything that we could have worried the most about, like, as far as nightmares, like, all happened. So, now Rorschach is to go on and continue to figure out that he keeps finding these people all attached to this pyramid company. We have Rorschach, who ends up going to Malik, who, of course, is the arch nemesis of the Minuteman. We find out that when Rorschach is to go to Malik, I guess, is to have cancer, and not the kind that you get cured from. And so Rorschach is trying to get answers from Malik, and Malik is to tell the story about the comedian blubbering to him one night and crying about how Malik and the comedian are probably best friends, and so on and so forth. And so, really, that's the only thing that Malik is to kind of deliver to us. That Malik was to say that supposedly Malik was on some list of people getting killed off, and comedian was on that list. And so there seems to be a list brewing from this pyramid company saying that there's certain people that are going to get wiped out, and that pyramid company is to actually be Ozymandias's company. So that kind of tells us there's a pattern here. There's a pattern emerging. I guess Janet had worked for the pyramid company. Certain allies of Dr. Manhattan had worked with this pyramid company, and so on and so forth. Eventually, all getting cancer, eventually getting killed off. So, to where when Rorschach is to re-meet back up with Malik to ask more questions, Malik is found dead with Rorschach's gun at his side, which all of a sudden had Rorschach have to run like heck out of this place because the police had been called, saying that, hey, Rorschach, we know that you're in there, we know that you did it, we know, which forces Rorschach to go to jail, to go to prison, so on and so forth. So, now, all right. So, now that I think I've covered a good piece of this movie, let's go into... So, Dr. Manhattan is to be intimate with Silk Specter, and so Silk Specter is to all of a sudden realize that she is not important to Dr. Manhattan anymore. Silk Specter is to talk to Dan and is to say that she doesn't think that Dr. Manhattan really understands the earth around him. That something about him, like simple things like a tie or a shirt or a pair of pants, is just kind of lost on him, and he doesn't really understand the big picture of all of them. He probably just understands like the chemicals of all of this stuff, like the real like breakdown of why they're all really there instead of why they're just to be a thing to just put on. So also like really just saying that like it just feels like Dr. Manhattan is just kind of like going through the motions of things just because he just doesn't understand anymore why he's doing what he's doing. Possibly because he's this unbeatable character. So what is the point of doing any number of things when he can just easily erase everything off the planet? So Silk Spectre goes off and is trying to be intimate with Dr. Manhattan, and it seems like Dr. Manhattan is trying to experiment with Silk Spectre and doing something that she thinks that, or that Dr. Manhattan thinks that Silk Spectre might like, and Silk Spectre is to just be like, well, no, that's not really something that I wanted, and so Dr. Manhattan's like, I don't know how I can please you anymore. I don't know how I can like keep you interested anymore. And so Silk Spectre is to walk off, realizing that Dr. Manhattan is also doing some other experiment for Ozymandias. And so Silk Spectre is to realize that she's not getting Dr. Manhattan's full attention, that she just has, or that she just sees Dr. Manhattan having a number of clones that can do any job of whatever. And so Silk Spectre is just to be like one of many things that Dr. Manhattan is doing right now, even though Dr. Manhattan is to say that um, that Dr. Manhattan's full focus is on Silk Spectre. Silk Spectre can't really believe that. That she's just something that Dr. Manhattan is to just do as a pity thing for her. So Silk Spectre is decided to finally just break up with Dr. Manhattan, and because she's just tired of it. She's just tired of having to be second fiddle to Dr. Manhattan doing something else. So she just breaks up with him to go off with Night Owl, and Dr. Manhattan realizes that's where she's heading, because Silk Spectre has no other friends besides Dan, and Silk Spectre is to be the only one that Dan probably has a real interest in also. So besides Rorschach being good friends with Rorschach. So we also have Silk Spectre being teleported to her mother's place. And so Silk Spectre, the first one, who is to, of course, be Sally, is to go on and talk about how there's been certain people that have mailed her certain things randomly. I guess real fans of hers. There is one point where there was to be this one plane that had Silk Spectre on the side of it, which I thought was really interesting. So Sally is to mention about the comedian and how the second Silk Spectre was to mention how like that guy, like from what he like did to you, how he took advantage of you, and Sally was just like, no, you just don't understand. Like um, you don't grasp what was really happening between the both of us. And so that's when they kind of flash back to the comedian taking advantage of Silk Spectre. But I think there was kind of some misinterpretation there of how both of them were to have some kind of relationship. And there was also this moment of flashbacking where the second Silk Spectre was talking with Sal, or was seeing Sally talked to her latest husband, where he was talking about the burden and having to kind of put up and feed both Sally and her daughter, which wasn't his. So, and how this guy was also talking about uh, why don't you go back to that other guy that's going to take advantage of you, and so on and so forth. So we find out later on in the film that Laurie is to realize that her actual father was Blake all along. And that when Laurie is to ask Sally about this, why didn't she tell her? Uh, Sally just kind of comes up with some kind of I'm sorry, it's the truth, your father is Blake, and she just kind of hid it from her for so long, because I think Sally maybe thought that Julie probably wouldn't have understood, or maybe she just wanted to wait until she was much older to really just tell her the real truth of it all. So, but Laurie goes back to Dan, and so her and Dan are having moments of just having getting really itchy about being put back into the costume. And so we have at one point um, where Dan is to kind of showcase kind of his bird cage, or his his cave of sorts, that is to have Archimedes, his little gadget where Silk Specter is to just kind of play around, or Laurie's to play around with Archimedes, and there's to be a flamethrower that is to be shot out, and so she ends up accidentally starting a fire, and Dan comes in is to just kind of get rid of it, and just hey, what happened? And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I just started experimenting, I just started hit buttons, and so on and so forth. So Dan goes over to his costume and is just kind of feeling nostalgic for putting his costume on. And so Dan goes and gives Sally his glasses, because she's kind of man, what is it like to be wearing those glasses? And so she puts it on, and they have night vision, and they have all kinds of things. And so she's like, wow, you can see everything here. And Dan's like, yeah, no matter how dark it got, I can always see with those glasses on. And she's like, wow, this must be how Dr. Manhattan can see all the time. And so Dan is so Dan just hey, go and put those away. Just go and put those away, whatever you want to do. Just kind of lock up when you're done. And he ends up walking off, realizing that he's yeah, I guess I'm just your rebound, or I guess I'm always going to be second fiddle to Dr. Manhattan. So but Silk Spectre is to become, of course, romantically entangled with Dan. Laurie and Dan are to, of course, go and be intimate. Once they start thrusting off the clothes, eventually Dan is to realize that he is to be a little premature with his jump into the bedroom business. So he realizes that he needs to take a couple of minutes. But then eventually later on, when both Night Owl and Silk Spectre decide that they need to go and put these costumes on yet again, because Dan is to realize how much that he needs this costume, and how they both realize that they need this costume, or their costumes, they decide to go out in Archimedes and try to save some people from a burning building, and they are successful in doing so. And then they decide to make love yet again because of the whole rush of that whole moment. So now we are at that time where Rorschach, of course, was to have gotten caught by police, and so now he is arrested. Now he's in jail. Now his mask is to be taken off, and so both Night Owl and Specter or Silk Spectre are wanting to decide to go and rescue Rorschach because Night Owl is to naturally assume that Rorschach had been framed for that whole thing, and they want to go and rescue him from jail. So we also have a moment where Dr. Manhattan is going on to a TV spot where he is to go and talk about things, get interviewed, and have certain people in the audience asking him questions. So Dr. Manhattan is to go on to TV, and it seems that Dr. Manhattan is to seemingly be too bright for TV. So Dr. Manhattan adjusts his own skin so that way he will be able to be camera ready. So Dr. Manhattan goes into this TV show and is to do this interview, and all of a sudden there's people asking him questions about certain people who had weirdly started to get cancer and started to die while being seemingly with Dr. Manhattan at some point and time. Bringing up how Janet, who had been Dr. Manhattan's lover, had died of cancer at some point. Wally Weaver had died of cancer at some point, being that Wally had consistently worked side by side with Dr. Manhattan and died. Malith, who had been, or Malik, who had consistently been the villain of the Minutemen as well as the Watchmen for a long stretch of time, is to also have cancer and is also to have died. So now Janet is to present herself and is to say that for all the time that she had been alongside Dr. Manhattan through the rough patches and the rough times and through all their struggles and so on and so forth, through John's whole life, that this is the thing that she gets at the end of this, of just getting cancer and having to die, because she had consistently been side by side with Dr. Manhattan through all of this. And so Dr. Manhattan is like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Like, nobody told me any of these people had died and had cancer. So now Dr. Manhattan, just so frustrated by all this, had decided to just go off and to live in Mars, creating this seemingly glass-like structure or environment that's just kind of floating on top of Mars, that is to, I guess, just be his home. So Rorschach, of course, is to be in prison, where he is to go on and to be with this psychologist, who, of course, is having him do a Rorschach test, where Rorschach is kind of remembering flashbacks about his life, remembering certain events of his life, and while doing this Rorschach test, Rorschach is to remember these gruesome visuals, but instead of saying what these gruesome visuals are, he ends up saying, like, oh, that's a cloud, that's a bouquet of flowers. That's this and that and that and that. So Rorschach is to go off into his prison cell where it seems like there's a cluster of people that all want him dead. And there's to be this guy, I think in the IMDb that they just call him Big Figure Prisoner, weirdly. And so it seems that there are to be these guys that are with Big Figure, because it comes down to Rorschach calling these characters fat, or calling them like big when they're small, or like some kind of oxymoron or kind of opposite kind of thing to just irritate these guys even more. So we have one of the guys, one of the kind of the bigger prisoner, ends up putting his hand through this cell, and because there's a riot going on in this prison, and so Rorschach is to grab this guy's hand and is to break his thumbs, and is to tie his hands together into this cell. And so now the guys are desperate to want to go into this cell, and this guy putting his hands in there is to jeopardize that. So they have to go and chop off this guy's hands to get into the cell, and then once they do, we have one of the other like big guys that the Big Figure is to be with. Rorschach goes and smashes this guy into this toilet, and he's like, "Hey, like a toilet going through a toilet, huh? What a weird thing, right?" So we also had that one Pagliacci joke where Rorschach was to say earlier on in this film, while he was going through some thing of his leading to him have to go and kill off somebody, while he was doing one of his cases, where he mentioned about the Pagliacci joke, where supposedly there was this guy who goes to this therapist and is to desperately ask if there's any way to cure his sadness. And so the therapist is like, well, that's easy. There's a clown that is to go and be this really good comedic clown, and you should go and see him. His name is Pagliacci. And so the person goes and bursts into tears and is to say, it's like, well, that's the problem, sir. Like, my name is Pagliacci. And so, like, hey, good joke, right? To say that the one person who is to go into this therapy session desperately needing help, and the person is to recommend, hey, yeah, go to this clown Pagliacci, you'll get a good laugh. And they're like, well, that's the problem, sir. Like, I am this clown. I am the person giving all these people laughs, and I'm sad. So I said the joke and then I'd explain it. Whatever. Anyways, pushing on. So we get to where, of course, the Night Owl and Silk Spectre are to go through and are to go through this prison and try to help Rorschach escape. And so of course they're successful about that. Rorschach is to try to give Night Owl an update about what's going on now, and so on and so forth, kind of leading to the pyramid company, and that they are to really need to make their way to Antarctica to talk to Ozymandias about what's really going on. Because everything is to lead to his company, and so that's going to have to lead them to Antarctica. So while Silk Spectre is to go and see Dr. Manhattan, because Silk Spectre is to now have to convince Dr. Manhattan to help this team, to help convince Dr. Manhattan that he still has humanity left inside of him, because Dr. Manhattan is to tell Silk Spectre that that's what she is to do, to convince um, Dr. Manhattan to help. So, because he's off in the moon, just kind of effing off because he could care less. So, we also had the moment, and I forgot about this, when Silk Spectre is to come to speak to Dan and say that Dr. Manhattan had left her. And so Dan is to tell Silk Spectre, it's like, well, hey, like, me and Mason go and talk and share some beers and, like, bring up the good old days, and how about you join me? And the Silk Spectre is like, I don't know. And so, like, Night Owl is like, well, hey, Mason would love to have you back, or Mason would love to have you there, and, like, I would love to have you there too. So, like, you're coming, like, it'll be fun. So, and plus, also, it seemed that, like, Dan and Silk Spectre love to be like trading stories anyways. So um, why not just have them go and talk with Mason? But they don't have a second scene of that whatsoever. They don't go into that, so that kind of sucked. That's why I didn't really bring it up. So both Rorschach and Mason decide to go and get Archimedes, and which is the big owl ship like thing, to have them head to Antarctica. And so Night Owl is in, like, the most get up like clothes um, to deal with the Antarctic cold, where Rorschach is just wearing his same old clothes. And so Night Owl is like, well, hey, you should be wearing something a lot warmer. And Rorschach is like, no, I'm fine. Like, no, I'm fine. Because, like, that's also the interesting thing about this movie, is we get these characters, like, I think a lot of people tried to mimic the whole Rorschach thing after this movie came out. Like, we kind of get, like, characters like Defendor, which was, like, the Woody Harrelson movie, that went on to, like, try to be kind of like a Rorschach-esque like character, but then we found out what Woody Harrelson really is in that movie, and then we're just like, oh, well, this is nice. This is a nice movie. So, uh, so in Antarctica, we find out that Ozymandias has planning on, throughout numerous parts of the world, um, putting these certain kind of Dr. Manhattan like bombs into certain locations like Moscow or New York, or certain kind of certain kind of big um, places of certain countries, so Ozymandias can all go and take out these bombs and explode them, and try and push the country forcibly together, or push the world forcibly together. So instead of fighting themselves, they instead join together to go up against this new threat, which is technically Dr. Manhattan, creating world peace simply because of Dr. Manhattan. So, when all of Ozymandias' scientists are all to have gone on and had this whole experiment go off without a hitch, Ozymandias is to be sharing champagne with all of them, and so all of them find out that every single one of them are to have a suicide concoction being put into their drinks, and they all die off. And so Ozymandias uses his machine to go and wipe them all off, to destroy them all off. So Oh, we forgot about the one moment. So they were trying to have it be that Ozymandias wasn't to be held in suspicion, because we have one moment where Ozymandias is to have some kind of um, man come in to try and take him down with all these people being there. And so Ozymandias was trying to fight this guy off and was to be very successful at it, to the point of when this guy was to supposedly be giving information to Ozymandias, he supposedly took a suicide pill, and he's like, "Oh no, don't let him consume this. Don't, he'll die because he's taking this suicide pill." So, but we find out that that was all just a show, to where Ozymandias was shoving this pill into a guy named Mr. Chess's mouth, so that way this so no one would figure out who this guy was working for, which was Ozymandias the whole entire time. So they go. So Rorschach and Night Owl go to Antarctica, and so it seems that Ozymandias is to tell these people his entire game plan, because there's nothing that they can do about it. That basically he had already set this whole thing up to already go off, for them to not have the ability to do a thing about it. And so Silk Spectre is going and talking to Dr. Manhattan, and so eventually this conversation ends up having Silk Spectre find out that the comedian was her father, and that Dr. Manhattan, after this conversation, is to realize that him talking to Silk Spectre is to make him realize that he can believe in humanity again, because for everything that has happened to Silk Spectre's life, it's like turning air into gold, and that there's a reason to believe in humanity, just because he can believe in Silk Spectre, and how from everything has turned into crap for her whole entire life, that that Silk Spectre still believes in humanity, is still going to fight for it, and even when Silk Spectre is to say that her life is one big joke, and then she ends up going and breaking this glass house uh, that Dr. Manhattan is to build, we get Dr. Manhattan to realize anyways that it's like, well, like maybe I should just go back to Earth to defend these people, because like I technically don't have a home. The only real home that I have left is Earth. So these bombs are all to be set off, and so both Silk Spectre and Manhattan are to go back to New York, realizing that these places have all been wiped out, which leads to now Dr. Manhattan realizing that all the work that he had done to help Ozymandias was to basically create all this destruction and to make Dr. Manhattan look like a villain, which now pushes Dr. Manhattan to make it back to Antarctica to now face Ozymandias to go and try to kill him, or to just try to, in one way or another, try to take him down. Which we end up seeing Dr. Manhattan coming as this big, massive character that kind of crushes through this one part of this Ozymandias hideout, And I thought that was so cool. Like I kind of wish that we would have done a little bit more with Dr. Manhattan as like this big massive like character, but we couldn't do much with that. Like really just Dr. Manhattan just comes as this big massive character to wipe out the Vietnamese in that war, but that's all we really get to play around with that. I wish we could have gotten more with it, to just kind of play with this massive ability of this character. So we don't even get to play around with that in the Watchmen series, which is kind of sad, but oh well, it is what it is with that. So and also just check out the Watchmen kind of series because it kind of plays around with the origin story again of Dr. Manhattan. It kind of plays with Ozymandias and kind of a number of things. So what happens at the end of this is Dr. Manhattan is to realize the thing that Ozymandias has done was technically the right move. It wipes out millions to protect billions, but it's still a horrible thing. But Ozymandias justifies it by turning on his TV, and it's kind of funny because Doctor Manhattan is like, "Oh, is that remote another like doomsday device?" And Ozymandias is like, "Sure, like you can compare it to that," which I think is kind of funny. Like you can say that a TV remote can technically be another doomsday device and some kind of thing to just kind of say that you latching yourself onto a TV could be a horrible thing for whatever reason. So Richard Nixon is going on and saying that the Soviets and all the other countries have all united to go and try to fight up against Dr. Manhattan. And so now Dr. Manhattan is to realize that he has technically created world peace and there isn't going to be a World War III anytime soon. And so there is a sigh of relief technically going on um, between some of the characters to just be like, okay, so the doomsday clock has technically stopped. So Dr. Manhattan is like, oh, okay, so his plan is to just be like, well, then I guess I'll just leave. Like, I'll leave. I'll go and I'll stay in Mars and I'll create my own life. And because Silk Spectre has inspired him to do so. And so he's like, well, like, I'm okay with taking the blame of this and then running off if that means that um, that we've kind of solved everything, that we've kind of uh, done this for the betterment of mankind. And so not everybody is okay with that. That supposedly Dr. Manhattan is taking the rap for this whole thing because characters like Rorschach is to know the truth. That Ozymandias was to have plotted all this and planned all this and whatever. And so that now leads with Dr. Manhattan now having to have Rorschach be killed off because Rorschach will tell the truth. So we have Rorschach, who of course realizes that Dr. Manhattan needs to kill him because Rorschach won't stop. Rorschach will tell everybody the real truth of things, and so Dr. Manhattan needs to kill him to keep this secret. So Rorschach is basically telling Dr. Manhattan, what are you waiting for? You know that you're going to have to kill me. And so Dr. Manhattan just confettis freaking Rorschach to be in this massive blood. And so now Night Owl is to be just so upset about all this that he freaking drops to his knees and is like, no. And so Night Owl is to go back to Ozymandias and just start beating him to death. And or half to death, because he can't really beat him all that well. Plus, he just is beating up a guy who is to not fight him. So eventually, at the end of all of this, like Osmandius is to not be taken away in cuffs. Uh, and just both Silk Spectre and Night Owl just go right back home, and or I guess to decide to go and spend the rest of their lives together. And so uh, that's when we have the moment where Lori is talking to Sally and mentioning about Blake being her father and how she found out. And so then Dan goes and tells kind of like Spectre kind of like the end of all things, and just kind of the about like kind of what had happened and so on and so forth. And so like the aftermath of all of it, how it's like nice, neat, wrapped in a tiny little bow. So there's to be this reporter at this news article who is to go on and drop this thing of like chili or something, or ketchup or something, on his chest. And so now there's to be some news reporter who's talking to uh, his boss, and he's like, well, hey, like, we need something snappy, we need something to cover here, and so come up with anything. And so all of a sudden we coincidentally have this news reporter who is to see the Rorschach journal, and I guess he's going to be covering that. And so that's the way this movie just kind of finishes up. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here, because this is a long stretch of a movie. I know I probably didn't get to everything of this movie. I know there's people that are to be diehard Watchmen fans and whatever, and they're to like know this movie by heart and specific details that I didn't go completely into, because there's a lot to digest in here. There's a lot to cover. I can probably go through and say that either one, this is probably the best that I could have come up with and covered and whatever, which didn't even cover the Dr. Manhattan origin story of things, which I guess I can still come to and talk about that, because I might as well. So, the Dr. Manhattan origin story is to be pretty simple. Dr. Manhattan is to, John is to be with a girl named Janet, and supposedly he had bought him a beer, which I guess really has never happened to him. And so these two fall in love, these two become both scientists, and so they go and they do this science experiment that is to be uh, a thing of which that accidentally John ends up getting stuck in this room where this science experiment is to be going off soon, because it is on some timer that they cannot control. So all of a sudden, both Janet and Weaver are to realize that they are to see John die, and so he does. So evidently John's father was to be some watchmaker, and supposedly when he is in his interview, he ends up talking about his father being a watchmaker. So, and how the reason why John had went back into this little spot that ends up creating him becoming Dr. Manhattan was all just him coming back for this watch and being locked into this one tank of a thing that is going to go off. So it seems that both Janet and or Janae, I want to say it's Janet, but it sounds like, I think it's spelled like Janae. It's spelled like Janey. So Janae and Weaver were going and at some point while they're going through their common day-to-day jobs, they continue to see these little ghosts or seemingly a thing that looked like a soul that was coming through, to the point of eventually they finally found that John had come back to them as this Dr. Manhattan character, which is all naked and didn't have clothes on. And so we had Weaver, who was to mention that um, there is a Superman and he is American. Coming to find out that Weaver is to say later that he was misquoted. What he actually meant to say is God does exist and he's American. And whether you believe in that or not, whether you believe in whatever, and how basically they built him up to be that Dr. Manhattan is just supposedly completely be able to withstand or to protect the United States from a nuclear holocaust or a nuclear weaponed attack of sorts that is coming from everywhere. Osmandius makes the assumption that, hey, like, Dr. Manhattan can't be everywhere all the time. So even if there is to be a nuclear weapon coming from everywhere, at some point John is going to miss 1% out of 100, and that 1% is going to be good enough to wipe out a large mass amount of things. And so, like, that's the problem of, like, Dr. Manhattan can completely stop everything. So, with that said, I think I covered most of this movie, or I hope I did. I think in a roundabout way, tried to. This one was going to be more challenging than a lot of other stuff because there's a lot of time period stuff. There's a lot of things to cover in this movie that's just kind of a period of time. And so, with that said, I'm okay about how this gets put out there, so I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Hopefully I covered everything. If there's not, there's probably not going to be a rebuttal because this is a one-off film. They didn't do a Watchmen 2 because how could they have? So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.